The phone rang at 2:07 in the morning, exactly 1 week after I buried my husband. I know the exact time because I had been staring at the ceiling for hours, unable to sleep, watching the red numbers on my bedside clock change with agonizing slowness. 2:05, 2:06, and then that sound, cutting through the silence of my bedroom like a knife through silk. My first thought was that something had happened to one of my children. Theo, my son, had been drinking too much since his father's funeral. Celeste, my daughter, had barely eaten in days. When your phone rings at 2 in the morning, a week after burying your husband of 32 years, your mind immediately goes to the worst possible scenarios. But when I grabbed my phone and saw the name on the screen, my confusion only deepened. Josiah Pemberton, the night watchman at Savannah Memorial Gardens, the historic cemetery where 5 generations of my family rested, including, as of 7 days ago, my beloved Edmund. I answered with trembling fingers. Josiah? What's wrong? There was a long pause. Josiah was 67 years old, a former Marine who had worked at that cemetery for 4 decades. I had known him since I was a young woman, visiting my grandmother's grave on Sunday afternoons. He was not a man given to drama or unnecessary calls. In all the years I had known him, he had never once called me at home. Mrs. Moreau. His voice was strange, hesitant in a way I had never heard from him. I think you need to come down here. To the cemetery? Josiah, it's 2 in the morning. I know, ma'am. I know it is. Another pause. I could hear him breathing heavily, as if he had been running. It's about your husband, ma'am. My blood ran cold. What about Edmund? Josiah, what are you talking about? I can't say it over the phone, Mrs. Moreau. You need to come see for yourself. Please, come quick, and come alone. The line went dead. I sat there in my bed, in the darkness of the bedroom I had shared with Edmund for 3 decades, trying to make sense of what had just happened. What could possibly be wrong with Edmund? He was dead. I had watched them lower his casket into the ground. I had thrown a handful of Georgia red clay onto the polished mahogany lid. I had stood there while 200 people offered their condolences, telling me what a wonderful man he was, what a tragedy it was to lose him so suddenly. My hands were shaking as I got dressed. I pulled on the first clothes I could find, a pair of dark slacks and a cashmere sweater that Edmund had given me for my birthday 2 years ago. The irony of wearing his gift was not lost on me, but I did not have the mental capacity to think about such things. My mind was racing with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. Had someone vandalized Edmund's grave? Had there been some kind of mistake with the burial? Had animals disturbed the site? I could not imagine what would prompt Josiah to call me at this hour, with that tone in his voice, unless something truly terrible had happened. The drive to Savannah Memorial Gardens took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of winding through the empty streets of my neighborhood, past the historic squares I had walked with Edmund countless times, past the restaurant where we had celebrated our 30th anniversary, past the gallery that had been the first of my 12 locations, the one my grandmother had left me when I was just 23 years old. $45 million. That was what my empire was worth now. 12 galleries across the Southeast, representing some of the most important contemporary artists in America. I had built it from nothing, from a single small space that my grandmother had run as more of a hobby than a business. Edmund had supported me every step of the way, had raised our children while I worked 18-hour days, had never once complained about being the husband of a woman who earned 10 times what he made as a university professor. Or so I had believed. The gates of the cemetery were open when I arrived, which was unusual. Josiah stood at the entrance, a flashlight in his hand, his weathered face impossible to read in the darkness. He did not speak when I pulled up. He simply nodded and began walking toward the oldest section of the grounds, where the Ashworth family mausoleum had stood for over a century. I followed him in silence. The night was warm and humid, typical for September in Savannah, and I could hear the sounds of insects in the ancient oak trees that lined the paths. Spanish moss hung from the branches like ghostly curtains, and under any other circumstances, I might have found the setting beautiful in its Gothic way. But tonight, with my heart pounding and my mind filled with dread, I could only focus on putting one foot in front of the other. We walked for what felt like an eternity, though it could not have been more than 5 minutes. Finally, we reached the mausoleum. It was a beautiful structure, built of white marble in the Greek Revival style, with columns and a pediment that bore the Ashworth family name. My grandmother was interred there, along with my parents and their parents before them. And now Edmund, the first Moreau to be given that honor, because I had loved him enough to want him beside me for eternity. Josiah stopped at the heavy bronze door. He turned to look at me, and in the beam of his flashlight, I could see that his eyes were troubled. "Mrs. Moreau," he said quietly, "I don't rightly know how to prepare you for what you're about to see. I've worked here for 40 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Josiah, you're scaring me. Just tell me what's wrong." He shook his head slowly. "Can't tell you, ma'am. You have to see it for yourself. Otherwise, you won't believe me." He pulled open the bronze door. It swung outward with a low groan of metal on metal, revealing the darkness within. Josiah stepped aside and gestured for me to enter, handing me his flashlight. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The mausoleum smelled of flowers, the dozens of arrangements that had been placed there after the funeral, now wilting in the September heat. Lilies and roses and orchids, their sweet scent already turning cloying as they began to decay. The beam of my flashlight swept across the marble walls, the bronze plaques bearing the names and dates of my ancestors, the stone bench where I had sat as a child while my grandmother told me stories about our family history. And then the light found him. He was sitting on the bench, dressed in a simple dark suit, his white hair disheveled, his familiar wire-rimmed glasses slightly askew. He was thinner than he had been before his illness, and there were dark circles under his eyes that I had never seen before. But it was unmistakably, impossibly him. Edmund, my husband, the man I had buried 7 days ago. Alive. I cannot describe the sound that came out of my mouth. It was not a scream exactly, but something more primal. The flashlight fell from my hands and clattered on the marble floor, spinning wildly and casting shadows that made Edmund's face appear and disappear in flashes of light and darkness. "Vivian." His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Please, let me explain." I stumbled backward, my back hitting the cold marble wall. My legs gave out beneath me, and I slid down to the floor, unable to take my eyes off the ghost, the hallucination, the impossible apparition sitting before me. "You're dead," I heard myself say. "I watched them put you in the ground. I saw your body in the casket. I held your hand. It was cold. You were cold, Edmund." He stood up slowly, his movements stiff and careful, and took a step toward me. I flinched away, pressing myself harder against the wall. He stopped, holding his hands up as if to show me he meant no harm. "I know," he said. "I know how this looks. I know what you must be thinking, but please, Vivian, please just listen to me. There are things you don't know, things I couldn't tell you." "Things you couldn't tell me?" My voice was rising, the shock giving way to something else. Anger, a terrible, burning anger that I had never felt before in my life. "Edmund, you let me believe you were dead. You let our children believe their father was dead. Do you have any idea what this week has been like? Theo has been drinking himself into a stupor every night. Celeste hasn't stopped crying. And I have been lying awake every single night, trying to figure out how to live the rest of my life without you." Edmund's face crumpled. For a moment, he looked like the man I had married, the gentle professor who cried at sad movies and wrote me love poems on our anniversary. Then his expression hardened into something I did not recognize. "I did it to protect you," he said. "All of you. There are people who want to destroy everything you've built, Vivian. People who would burn your galleries to the ground and salt the earth if they could. And I was the only one who could stop them." "What people? What are you talking about?" He took another step toward me, and this time I did not flinch. I was too confused, too overwhelmed to be afraid anymore. I just needed to understand. "My brother," Edmund said, and the word came out like a curse. Desmond Moreau. Edmund's younger brother, by 4 years. A charming, handsome man who worked as an art dealer in Zurich and visited us perhaps once or twice a year for holidays. I had always found him slightly superficial, a little too smooth, but Edmund adored him, had adored him. had spent decades pulling him out of failed business ventures and collapsed marriages, always with the patience of an older brother who wanted nothing more than to see his sibling succeed. What about Desmond? Edmund sat back down on the bench, as if the weight of what he was about to tell me was too much to bear standing. He's been running a forgery operation for 15 years, Vivian. Using your galleries, using your name, using the contacts and the credibility you built from nothing. The words hit me like a physical blow. That's impossible. I would have known. My staff would have caught it. 3 paintings. Edmund's voice was flat, emotionless. 3 paintings that passed through your Atlanta location between 2019 and 2022. All sold to private collectors for a combined total of $4.2 million. All forgeries. All with certificates of authenticity bearing your signature. I shook my head, refusing to believe it. No, Edmund. That cannot be true. I inspect every piece personally before it goes to market. I have experts who verify provenance. There is no way. He had help inside, Edmund interrupted. Someone in your organization who was feeding him information about which pieces were coming in, which collectors were interested, which authentication processes could be bypassed. I don't know who yet. I was still trying to figure that out when everything happened. When you died, you mean? When you faked your own death and let everyone who loves you believe you were gone forever? Edmund met my eyes, and I saw something in his gaze that I had never seen before. A deep, profound shame. It wasn't supposed to be fake, Vivian. Not at first. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? 3 months ago, I confronted Desmond. I told him I knew what he was doing, and I gave him a choice. He could come clean, return the money to the collectors, and turn himself in, or I would go to the FBI myself. He chose a third option. Edmund paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. He tried to kill me, Vivian. The heart attack that supposedly took my life? It wasn't a heart attack. It was poison. Something slow-acting that mimicked cardiac arrest. He put it in my coffee the morning of my collapse. The mausoleum seemed to spin around me. I gripped the cold marble floor, trying to anchor myself to reality. But you survived. By luck. Pure luck. The paramedics who responded had just come from a training on exotic toxins. One of them recognized the symptoms and administered the correct treatment. By the time I regained consciousness, I was in the hospital, and I realized I had a choice to make. A choice? Edmund leaned forward, his eyes intense. Desmond thought he had killed me. As far as he knew, his problem was solved. If I came back from the dead, he would try again. And next time, he might not stop with just me. He might go after you or the children or anyone else who threatened his operation. But if I stayed dead, I could investigate. I could gather evidence. I could find out who else was involved and bring down the entire network before anyone else got hurt. I stared at him, trying to process everything he was telling me. My husband, the quiet professor, the gentle soul who had never raised his voice in anger in all the years I had known him, had faked his own death to become some kind of vigilante detective. It was absurd. It was insane. It was, "You should have told me." The words came out harder than I intended. Edmund flinched as if I had struck him. "I wanted to protect you." "No." I pushed myself up from the floor, my legs still unsteady, but my anger giving me strength. "No, Edmund. You wanted to control the situation. You wanted to make the decisions. You wanted to be the hero who saved everyone without giving anyone else a voice in the matter. That's not protection. That's arrogance. Vivian, 32 years. I was shaking now, with anger and grief and 1,000 other emotions I could not name. 32 years of marriage, and you couldn't trust me enough to tell me the truth? You couldn't give me the choice to stand beside you? Instead, you let me grieve. You let me plan your funeral. You let me pick out the flowers and write the obituary and stand at your grave and throw dirt on your casket while you watched from where, Edmund? Where have you been hiding while your family fell apart? He gestured vaguely at the mausoleum around us. Here, mostly. Josiah figured it out on the second night. He found me sleeping in the groundskeeper's shed and threatened to call the police. But I told him everything, and he agreed to help. He's been bringing me food, keeping watch, making sure no one discovered me before I was ready. I looked over my shoulder. Josiah was standing at the entrance of the mausoleum, his face carefully neutral. I felt a flash of betrayal toward him too, but I could not deal with that right now. "And what exactly was your plan?" I demanded, turning back to Edmund. "Hide in a graveyard forever? Wait until Desmond made a mistake? How long were you going to let us suffer?" "I was going to tell you tonight," Edmund said quietly. "Josiah was supposed to bring you here. I have enough evidence now to go to the authorities. Bank records, communications, even a confession that Desmond made to one of his accomplices that I managed to record. I was going to show you everything and ask for your help to bring him down." "My help? Now you want my help?" "I need your help, Vivian. I can't do this alone, and—" He paused, and for the first time, he looked genuinely uncertain. And I realized, hiding here in the dark, that I made a terrible mistake, not in trying to stop Desmond, but in thinking I could do it without you, in thinking that protecting you meant keeping you in the dark. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to walk out of that mausoleum and never look back, to pretend this nightmare had never happened, to go home to my bed and convince myself that I was simply losing my mind from grief. But I could not, because despite everything, despite the lies and the deception and the unimaginable cruelty of what he had done, I still loved him. I had loved Edmund Moreau since I was 23 years old, and 1 week of grief had not changed that. Even discovering that he was alive, even learning that he had put me through hell to protect me from a threat I had not known existed, could not erase 3 decades of devotion. And there was something else too, something darker, something that had been growing in the back of my mind ever since Edmund had mentioned Desmond's name. Someone in my organization had betrayed me. Someone I trusted had been helping to destroy everything I had built. And if there was one thing I had learned in my 40 years of business, it was that betrayal could not go unanswered. "Tell me everything," I said finally, "from the beginning. Every detail, every name, every piece of evidence you have. And then we're going to figure out exactly how to make your brother pay for what he's done." Edmund's face showed a mix of relief and something that looked almost like fear. Perhaps he had expected me to forgive him. Perhaps he had expected me to walk away. But I do not think he had expected this. The cold determination in my voice, the steel in my eyes. He had wanted to protect me from the darkness. He had not realized that I had my own darkness, buried deep, waiting for the right moment to emerge. "There's something else you need to know," Edmund said slowly, "about who's been helping Desmond inside your organization." "Who?" He hesitated, and I could see him wrestling with himself. Whatever he was about to tell me, it was going to hurt. I braced myself. "I don't have definitive proof yet," he said, "but I'm almost certain it's Marlena." The name hit me like a bucket of ice water. Marlena. Marlena Vance Moreau, my daughter-in-law, Theo's wife of 5 years, the woman who had stood beside me at Edmund's funeral, holding my hand while I wept. The woman who had been sleeping under my roof for the past week, comforting me in my grief. The woman who had been in my inner circle for half a decade, with access to everything. I looked at Edmund, and I felt something shift inside me. The grief, the confusion, the anger, all of it crystallized into a single, burning purpose. "Tell me," I said. "Tell me everything." To understand how I ended up standing in a mausoleum at 3 a.m, listening to my resurrected husband accuse my daughter-in-law of fraud, I need to take you back to the beginning. Not the beginning of this nightmare, but the beginning of everything. The beginning of Edmund and me. I was 23 years old when I inherited my grandmother's gallery. It was a small space on a side street in Savannah's historic district, barely profitable, filled with watercolors by local artists and antique frames that my grandmother had collected over decades. Most people expected me to sell it. I had just graduated from business school, had offers from consulting firms in Atlanta and New York, had a future that everyone agreed would be bright and lucrative, and far away from the dusty little gallery where I had spent my childhood summers. But I loved that place. I loved the smell of oil paint and old wood, loved the way the afternoon light came through the tall windows, loved the feeling of being surrounded by beauty that someone had created with their own hands. So instead of selling, I took out a loan, renovated the space, and began reaching out to emerging artists whose work I admired. Edmund walked into my gallery on a Tuesday afternoon in April. He was 28, a doctoral student in art history at the local university, researching a paper on Southern folk art. He had wire-rimmed glasses and paint-stained fingers from a hobby he never quite gave up. And when he smiled at me, I felt something I had never felt before, a sense of recognition, as if I had been waiting for him my entire life without knowing it. We were married within 2 years. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends, held in the courtyard behind my grandmother's gallery. My parents were skeptical of Edmund. He came from a modest family, had no wealth or connections, and his career prospects as an academic were limited at best. But I did not care about any of that. I loved him for his kindness, his intelligence, his unwavering support of my ambitions when so many men of that era would have felt threatened by a wife who earned more than they did. The early years were hard. I worked constantly, building relationships with artists and collectors, expanding into new markets, taking risks that kept me awake at night with anxiety. Edmund was my rock through all of it. He finished his doctorate, took a teaching position at the university, and handled most of the childcare when Theo was born, followed by Celeste 4 years later. He never complained, never made me feel guilty for missing dinners or school events, never suggested that I should slow down or scale back my dreams. By the time I turned 40, I had 5 galleries. By 50, I had 12. My net worth had grown to $45 million, and I had been featured in magazines and invited to speak at conferences and consulted by museums on acquisitions. I had achieved everything I had ever wanted professionally. But somewhere along the way, something had shifted in my marriage. I did not notice it at first. Edmund was still loving, still supportive, still the man I had fallen for in that dusty gallery 30 years ago. But there was a distance that had not been there before, a wall that I could not quite see but could somehow feel. I attributed it to the natural evolution of a long marriage. We were comfortable with each other, perhaps too comfortable. The passion had cooled into companionship. The excitement had mellowed into routine. I told myself it was normal, that every couple went through this, that what we had was still better than what most people could hope for. I did not realize until much later that Edmund was carrying a burden he could not share with me. The burden of being the husband of a successful woman in a world that still expected men to be providers. The burden of watching his brother Desmond flash expensive watches and talk about his international deals, while Edmund graded undergraduate papers and drove a 10-year-old car. The burden of loving me completely, while feeling somewhere deep inside that he was not quite enough. Desmond had always been a presence in our lives, though not a constant one. He lived in Zurich, worked in the international art market, and visited us once or twice a year for holidays or family occasions. He was charming and handsome and always had stories about glamorous parties and wealthy clients. The children adored him when they were young. He brought them expensive gifts from Europe and told them tales of his adventures that made Edmund's quiet academic life seem boring by comparison. I tolerated Desmond because Edmund loved him. It was clear that their relationship was complicated, that Edmund felt responsible for his younger brother in ways that went beyond normal sibling bonds. Over the years, I learned bits and pieces of their history. Their father had been a difficult man, cold and demanding, who had made it clear that Edmund was his favorite. Desmond had grown up in his brother's shadow, always second best, always trying to prove himself worthy of attention he never received. When Desmond's first marriage fell apart, Edmund lent him money. When his second business venture failed, Edmund bailed him out. When his gambling debts threatened to destroy him, Edmund quietly paid them off without telling me the full amount. I knew about some of these interventions, but not all of them. Edmund kept the worst of it hidden, ashamed perhaps of his brother's failures, or maybe just trying to protect me from the burden of knowing. In retrospect, I should have asked more questions. I should have demanded to know exactly how much money was flowing from our accounts to Desmond's disasters. But I trusted Edmund completely, and I was so focused on building my empire that I did not pay close attention to the cracks forming in its foundation. Theo met Marlena at a charity gala 6 years ago. She was a young attorney, beautiful and ambitious, with a smile that could light up a room and a handshake that meant business. Theo was immediately smitten. He had always been a romantic, my son, always looking for the great love story that his parents seemed to have. He saw in Marlena everything he thought he wanted: intelligence, beauty, drive. A woman who could match him, challenge him, push him to be better. They were engaged within 6 months and married a year later. I had reservations from the beginning, though I kept them mostly to myself. There was something about Marlena that did not quite add up. She was too perfect, too polished, too eager to please. When she looked at Theo, I sometimes caught a calculating glint in her eye that disappeared so quickly I wondered if I had imagined it. Celeste shared my concerns. My daughter had inherited my instincts for reading people, and she never warmed to her new sister-in-law despite Marlena's persistent efforts to befriend her. But Theo was happy, deliriously so, and neither of us wanted to be the one to cast shadows on his joy. Over the years, Marlena integrated herself into our family with surgical precision. She remembered birthdays and anniversaries, sent thoughtful gifts, called me weekly to check in. She volunteered to help with gallery events and proved herself surprisingly knowledgeable about the art world. When I complimented her on this, she laughed and said she had been reading up to better understand my work. I should have wondered why a corporate attorney would invest so much time learning about contemporary art markets. I should have questioned her sudden interest in which pieces were coming into my galleries and which collectors were interested in acquiring them. But I was flattered by her attention and grateful that Theo had found someone who seemed to genuinely care about our family. It was Edmund who first noticed something wrong. 6 months before his supposed death, he came to me with a troubled expression and asked if I had authorized a sale to a private collector in Geneva. I had not. When we investigated, we found that the paperwork was impeccable, bearing all the appropriate signatures and certifications, but I had no memory of ever approving the transaction. I wanted to involve the police immediately, but Edmund convinced me to wait. He said he wanted to look into it himself first, to make sure we understood what we were dealing with before we brought in outside authorities. I agreed, trusting his judgment, as I always had. What I did not know was that Edmund had already discovered much more than he told me. He had traced the fraudulent sale back to a network of forgeries that spanned 15 years and 3 continents. He had found evidence linking Desmond to the operation, and he had begun to suspect that someone inside my organization was feeding information to the forgers, someone with access to my authentication processes and collector databases. He did not tell me any of this because he wanted to protect me. He did not want me to know that his brother, the man I had welcomed into my home for 3 decades, had been systematically exploiting everything I had built. He did not want me to face the possibility that someone close to us, someone we trusted, was part of the conspiracy. So he investigated alone, in secret, for months. He gathered evidence. He documented transactions. He recorded conversations when he could. And when he finally confronted Desmond with what he knew, his brother tried to kill him. The poison Desmond used was sophisticated, designed to mimic the symptoms of a heart attack. If the paramedics had been less experienced, if they had not just completed training on exotic toxins, Edmund would have died on our kitchen floor, and no one would ever have known it was murder. But he survived. And in those first confused hours of consciousness in the hospital, knowing that Desmond believed him dead, Edmund made a decision that would change everything. He decided to stay dead, to use his supposed death as cover while he continued his investigation, gathered enough evidence to bring down the entire network, and protected me from the danger he had brought upon our family. It was a decision made out of love. I believe that, even now. Edmund wanted to shield me from the horror of knowing what his brother had done, from the scandal that would erupt when the truth came out, from the danger of being targeted by people who had already tried to kill once. But it was also a decision made out of arrogance, the arrogance of a man who believed he knew what was best for his wife, the arrogance of thinking that protection meant control, that love meant making choices for the people you cared about without giving them a voice. As I stood in that mausoleum, listening to Edmund explain how Marlena had been feeding information to Desmond for at least 2 years, how she had likely married Theo specifically to gain access to my organization, how she had been collecting a percentage of the forgery profits in exchange for her inside knowledge, I felt something fundamental shift in my understanding of my own life. For 32 years, I had believed my marriage was a partnership. I had believed Edmund and I faced the world together, shared everything, kept no secrets. Now I knew That had never been entirely true. Edmund had been carrying burdens alone, making decisions alone, keeping me in the dark about things that affected my life and my family and my legacy. He had done it out of love. But love without trust is not really love at all. It is something else, something that looks like protection, but feels like a cage. I did not say any of this to Edmund that night. There would be time for that conversation later, time to untangle the complicated knot of emotions that his resurrection had created. Right now, I had more pressing concerns. My daughter-in-law was a traitor. My brother-in-law was a criminal. And somewhere in my organization, there might be others who had betrayed me. It was time to find out exactly how deep this went. The first thing I did when I left the mausoleum that night was call Celeste. It was nearly 4 a.m, but my daughter answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the hour. She had not been sleeping well since her father's funeral. None of us had. "Mom? What's wrong?" I sat in my car outside the cemetery gates, my hands still trembling on the steering wheel. How do you tell your daughter that her father is alive? How do you explain that the grief she has been drowning in for a week was based on a lie? I had no idea where to begin. "I need you to come to the house," I said. "Now, don't tell anyone where you're going, especially not Theo or Marlena. Can you do that?" There was a pause. Celeste was smart enough to know that something serious was happening, and wise enough not to ask questions over the phone. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. I drove home in a daze, my mind spinning with everything Edmund had told me. 15 years of forgeries, $4.2 million in fraudulent sales. My name, my reputation, my life's work, all being used as cover for Desmond's criminal operation. And Marlena, the woman who had held my hand at my husband's funeral, who had slept under my roof while I grieved, was part of it. The house felt different when I walked through the front door. It was the same historic Savannah mansion I had lived in for 25 years, the same hardwood floors and antique furniture and paintings that I had collected with such care over decades. But now I saw it through new eyes. How many times had Marlena walked these halls, gathering information to pass along to Desmond? How many family dinners had she sat through, smiling and charming, while secretly plotting to destroy everything I had built? Celeste arrived exactly when she said she would. She came through the back door as I had instructed, and found me sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee that had already gone cold. "Mom, you look terrible. What's going on?" I looked at my daughter, at her worried eyes and the dark circles beneath them that matched my own, and I made a decision. Edmund had kept secrets to protect us. He had lied and deceived and let us suffer because he thought he knew what was best. I would not make the same mistake. "Sit down," I said. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I need you to listen to everything before you react." And then I told her. All of it. Edmund alive in the mausoleum. The forgery operation. Desmond's attempt to kill his own brother. Marlena's betrayal. Everything. Celeste did not interrupt once. She sat perfectly still, her face cycling through shock, disbelief, anger, and finally a cold, hard fury that I recognized because I felt it myself. "I knew it," she said when I finished. "I knew there was something wrong with her. From the very beginning, I could feel it. That fake smile, the way she was always so interested in your business. I told Theo 100 times that something was off, but he wouldn't listen. He loves her, or he thinks he does. He loves an illusion, a character she created to trap him." Celeste's hands were clenched into fists on the table. How could Dad do this to us? How could he let us think he was dead? This was the question I had been wrestling with since leaving the cemetery. He thought he was protecting us. He was wrong, but his intentions were good. Good intentions don't erase a week of hell, Mom. Do you know what it's been like? Watching you fall apart, trying to hold myself together, dealing with Theo's drinking and Marlena's fake sympathy? And the whole time, Dad was hiding in a cemetery like some kind of ghost? I know. Believe me, I know. And your father and I will have a very long conversation about that when this is over. But right now, we have bigger problems. Desmond thinks Edmund is dead. Marlena doesn't know we've discovered her involvement. We have a window of opportunity to gather evidence and bring them both down, but it won't stay open forever. Celeste took a deep breath, visibly forcing herself to focus. She had inherited my ability to compartmentalize, to set aside emotional turmoil when practical matters demanded attention. It was a skill that had served me well in business, and I was grateful to see it in my daughter. "What do you need me to do?" Over the next 3 days, Celeste and I worked in secret to verify everything Edmund had told me. He had given me copies of the evidence he had gathered, bank records and communications, and authentication documents that traced the forgery operation back 15 years. But I needed to see it for myself, to confirm with my own eyes that my brother-in-law and my daughter-in-law had truly betrayed me. The first thing I did was contact Raymond Chen, a forensic accountant I had worked with years ago during a business dispute. Raymond was discreet, thorough, and completely trustworthy. I told him I suspected financial irregularities in my organization and asked him to audit the sales records for the 3 paintings Edmund had identified as forgeries. His findings confirmed my worst fears. The paperwork for all 3 sales had been expertly manipulated. The authentication certificates bore my signature, but Raymond's analysis showed they had been digitally altered from legitimate documents I had signed for other works. Someone with access to my files had copied my signature and applied it to fraudulent certificates. The money trail was even more damning. The proceeds from the sales had been routed through a series of shell companies before eventually landing in accounts controlled by Desmond. But Raymond found something Edmund had missed. A separate payment, smaller but consistent, flowing from one of Desmond's companies to an account in the Cayman Islands. An account that, with some digging, Raymond traced back to Marlena Vance Moreau. She had not just been helping Desmond. She had been taking a cut of every fraudulent sale for the past 2 years. 20% of the profits, deposited quarterly, totaling just over $800,000. When I showed this to Celeste, she actually laughed, not with humor, but with a kind of bitter amazement. $800,000. That's what my brother's happiness was worth to her. That's the price she put on our family. The next step was more delicate. I needed to know if anyone else in my organization was involved. Edmund suspected that Marlena was the primary inside source, but there could be others. Employees who had been bribed or blackmailed into cooperation. Colleagues I had trusted for years, who might have been feeding information to Desmond's network. I asked Celeste to help me conduct a quiet internal review. As a curator, she had legitimate reasons to examine sales records and authentication files. She spent 2 days going through everything, looking for patterns, anomalies, anything that might suggest additional conspirators. What she found was both relieving and disturbing. There was no evidence of widespread corruption in my organization. The forgery operation appeared to have been carefully targeted, with Marlena providing specific information about vulnerable transactions rather than compromising my systems wholesale. But she also found something else. A series of emails between Marlena and my head of authentication in Atlanta, a woman named Patricia Holloway, who had worked for me for 12 years. The emails were coded, using language about special projects and alternative suppliers that could have been innocent business communication. But when Celeste cross-referenced them with the dates of the fraudulent sales, the pattern was undeniable. Patricia had been helping Marlena bypass the authentication process for the forged paintings. 12 years. Patricia had worked for me for 12 years. I had attended her wedding, sent flowers when her mother died, given her bonuses and promotions, and trusted her with the integrity of my entire operation. And she had been betraying me. I called Patricia that afternoon and told her I needed her to come to Savannah for an urgent meeting about a new acquisition. She sounded nervous on the phone, which told me everything I needed to know. Innocent people don't get nervous when their boss calls. While I waited for Patricia to arrive, I had to deal with a more immediate problem. Desmond had called to say he was flying in from Zurich. He wanted to discuss the future of the family now that Edmund was gone, and he suggested we have dinner to talk about how he could help me manage my business affairs during this difficult time. The audacity of it took my breath away. This man had tried to kill his own brother. He had been stealing from me for 15 years, and now he was coming to my home, to my table, to offer his assistance like some kind of concerned relative. But I could not refuse, not yet. Edmund and I had agreed that we needed more evidence before going to the authorities. We needed Desmond to incriminate himself further, to say something that would prove his involvement beyond any doubt. and for that, I needed to play the part of the grieving widow who had no idea her brother-in-law was a criminal. Desmond arrived on a Thursday evening. He came straight from the airport, impeccably dressed as always, with a bottle of expensive wine and an expression of practiced sympathy. He embraced me at the door and told me how sorry he was, how much he missed Edmund, how devastated the whole family was by this sudden loss. I smiled and thanked him and invited him inside, and the whole time I was thinking about how this man had poisoned my husband, how he had stood at Edmund's funeral, giving a eulogy about brotherhood and love, while knowing that he had tried to murder the man in the casket. The performance required every ounce of self-control I possessed. We sat in the living room, the same room where I had received condolences from 200 guests a week ago. Desmond poured the wine he had brought and raised his glass in a toast to Edmund's memory. I drank, though every sip tasted like poison in my mouth. "Vivian, I've been thinking about the galleries," Desmond said after the pleasantries were exhausted. "I know this isn't the time to discuss business, but I'm worried about you. Running a 12-location operation is demanding even under normal circumstances. With everything you're going through, the grief, the stress, it might be too much. What are you suggesting?" He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Let me help. I have connections in the European art market. I could handle the international side of things, take some of the burden off your shoulders. You could focus on healing, on being with your family, on processing this terrible loss." I studied his face, looking for some sign of the monster beneath the charming exterior. But there was nothing, just a handsome, well-dressed man offering to help his grieving sister-in-law. If I had not known the truth, I would have been touched by his concern. "That's very generous, Desmond. But I'm not sure I'm ready to make any changes right now." Of course. There's no rush. I just want you to know that I'm here for you. Whatever you need." He paused, taking another sip of wine. "Edmund would have wanted me to look after you. He always said that if anything happened to him, I should make sure you and the children were taken care of." The lie was so smooth, so effortless, that I almost admired his skill. Edmund had never said anything of the sort. In fact, Edmund had specifically warned me about Desmond years ago, had told me to be careful about how much I shared with his brother about my business. I had not listened then. I was listening now. "There is something you could help me with, actually," I said, deciding to test him. "I've been reviewing some old sales records, and I found a few transactions that seem irregular. Paintings that were sold through our Atlanta location a few years ago. I don't remember authorizing them. Was it my imagination, or did Desmond's expression flicker for just a moment? Irregular how? The paperwork is all in order, but something feels off. I was thinking of having a forensic accountant look into it, just to be safe." The silence that followed lasted only a second, but it told me everything. Desmond's mask slipped, just barely, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "That seems like a lot of trouble for some old transactions," he said carefully. "Are you sure it's worth the expense, especially now when you have so much else to deal with?" "You're probably right. I'm sure it's nothing." I smiled at him, the same smile I used in business negotiations when I wanted someone to underestimate me. "I've just been so scattered lately. Grief does strange things to the mind." Desmond relaxed visibly. "It does. You should rest, Vivian. Take care of yourself. The business will still be there when you're ready to deal with it." He left an hour later, after extracting a promise that I would consider his offer to help with the international operations. I watched his car drive away, then went immediately to my study and wrote down everything he had said, every word, every expression, every moment where his mask had slipped. The next morning, Patricia Holloway arrived from Atlanta. I met her in my office at the main gallery, with Celeste present as a witness. Patricia was in her late 40s, a slim woman with graying hair and nervous hands that she could not keep still. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," I said. "I know it's been a difficult time for everyone." "Of course, Mrs. Moreau. I was so sorry to hear about Mr. Moreau. He was such a kind man." I let the silence stretch uncomfortably. Patricia's hands twisted in her lap. Finally, I opened a folder on my desk and slid 3 pieces of paper across to her. "Can you explain these emails?" I watched the color drain from her face as she read, the coded language about special projects, the references to alternative suppliers, the dates that matched exactly with the fraudulent sales. I don't know what you're talking about. Patricia, I've worked with you for 12 years. I know when you're lying. I kept my voice calm, almost gentle. I'm giving you one chance to tell me the truth. If you cooperate, I'll do what I can to help you. If you don't, I'm going to turn everything over to the FBI and let them sort it out. The dam broke. Patricia started crying, ugly, heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Between tears, the story came out. Marlena had approached her 2 years ago, had discovered that Patricia was drowning in debt from her husband's medical bills. She had offered a solution, a way to make some extra money. All Patricia had to do was look the other way on certain authentication requests, sign off on paperwork without examining it too closely. I didn't know it was forgery at first, Patricia sobbed. I thought it was just some kind of tax thing, rich people moving money around. By the time I figured out what was really happening, I was in too deep. Marlena said if I tried to stop, she would make sure I went to prison. She said she had evidence that would make it look like I was the mastermind. I was so scared, Mrs. Moreau. I'm so sorry. I believed her. Patricia was not a criminal mastermind. She was a desperate woman who had been manipulated and threatened by someone far more ruthless than herself. It did not excuse what she had done, but it made it understandable. I need you to write down everything, I said. Every interaction with Marlena, every transaction you helped facilitate, every piece of evidence you can remember. And then I need you to tell this story to someone else. Patricia looked up, her face blotchy and tear-stained. The police? Eventually. But first, I need you to tell it to my husband. The confusion on her face was almost comical. But Mr. Moreau is dead. No, I said. He's not. That evening, I brought Patricia to the mausoleum. Edmund was waiting, looking slightly healthier than he had 3 days ago. Josiah had been bringing him better food, and the hope of finally ending this nightmare had put some color back in his cheeks. Patricia's reaction to seeing Edmund alive was dramatic. She screamed, backed against the marble wall, and crossed herself like she was warding off evil spirits. It took several minutes to calm her down enough to explain the situation. Once she understood, she told Edmund everything she had told me. The approach from Marlena, the financial pressure, the escalating demands, the threats. Edmund recorded it all, adding her testimony to the evidence he had already gathered. This is enough, he said when she finished. Between Patricia's statement, Raymond's financial analysis, and the documents I've collected, we have more than enough to bring criminal charges against both Desmond and Marlena. So we go to the FBI? I asked. Soon. But there's one more thing I want to do first. Edmund's expression hardened. I want Desmond to confess, not just to the forgery, but to trying to kill me. Right now, we can prove financial crimes, but attempted murder is different. If he doesn't admit to it, he might find a way to avoid those charges. How do you plan to get him to confess? Edmund smiled, and there was something dangerous in it that I had never seen before. By coming back from the dead. We spent the next 2 days planning. Edmund would reveal himself at a family gathering, confronting Desmond in front of witnesses with all the evidence we had gathered. The shock of seeing his brother alive, combined with the mountain of proof against him, would hopefully push Desmond into saying something incriminating. It was risky. Desmond was clever, and even in extreme circumstances, he might manage to keep his composure. But Edmund was convinced it was our best chance. There was another reason for the family gathering, one that Edmund and I discussed in private. We needed to deal with Marlena too. And we needed to give Theo a chance to hear the truth from us before the authorities became involved. I worried about my son. Theo had been so devastated by his father's death, had been drinking so heavily, had relied so completely on Marlena's support during the past week. How would he react to learning that his wife was a criminal, that she had married him for access to his family's business, that everything he believed about his marriage was a lie? Celeste thought we should tell Theo privately, before the confrontation, give him time to process, to prepare himself. But Edmund disagreed. If we tell him ahead of time, he might warn Marlena, Edmund said. I know that's hard to hear, but we can't take the risk. He loves her. Love makes people do irrational things. I thought about Edmund's decision to fake his own death, to keep me in the dark for a week while I grieved. Yes, love certainly made people do irrational things. In the end, I agreed with Edmund's plan. We would reveal everything at once, to everyone. It would be brutal, especially for Theo, but it was the safest approach. I sent out invitations for what I called a memorial dinner. 1 week after Edmund's funeral, I wanted to gather the family for a private remembrance. Desmond, who was still in Savannah, accepted immediately. Marlena responded on behalf of herself and Theo, expressing how touched she was by the gesture. The stage was set, the evidence was ready, and somewhere in a mausoleum on the outskirts of Savannah, my husband was preparing to rise from the dead. The day before the memorial dinner, everything nearly fell apart. I was in my study, reviewing the final arrangements with Celeste, when Marlena knocked on the door. She was dressed impeccably as always, her blonde hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, her makeup flawless, the perfect picture of a supportive daughter-in-law. "Vivian, do you have a moment? There's something I need to discuss with you." My heart rate spiked, but I kept my expression neutral. "Of course, come in." Celeste made an excuse about checking on the caterers and left the room, shooting me a look of warning as she passed. I gestured for Marlena to sit in the chair across from my desk. "What's on your mind?" Marlena crossed her legs and folded her hands in her lap, a gesture I had seen her make 1,000 times. It struck me now how calculated it was, how every movement she made was designed to project a specific image: the concerned wife, the devoted daughter-in-law, the woman who belonged in this family. "I'm worried about tomorrow night," she said. "About Theo, specifically. He's been struggling so much since Edmund's passing. I'm not sure a memorial dinner is the best thing for him right now. Theo will be fine. He needs closure, just like the rest of us." "I know, but—" Marlena hesitated, and something shifted in her expression. Something harder, more calculating. "I've also been thinking about the future, about the galleries. I know Desmond has offered to help, and I think you should seriously consider it." I felt a chill run down my spine. This was not a casual suggestion. This was a coordinated push. Desmond and Marlena working together to get their hands on my business. They must have discussed it, planned it, decided that the grieving widow was vulnerable enough to manipulate. "Why are you so interested in what happens with my galleries, Marlena?" The question hung in the air between us. For just a moment, I saw something flicker in Marlena's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that I had pushed back. Or maybe recognition that I was not as oblivious as she had assumed. "I'm just thinking about the family," she said smoothly. "About Theo's inheritance. About making sure everything you've built is protected for future generations. And you think Desmond is the right person to help with that? He has experience in the international art market, connections that could be valuable." Marlena uncrossed her legs and leaned forward slightly. "Vivian, I know you've always been independent, but there's no shame in accepting help when you need it. Edmund would have wanted you to lean on family during this difficult time." The mention of Edmund's name from her lips made my stomach turn. This woman had been complicit in trying to kill my husband. She had profited from his supposed death, and now she was invoking his memory to manipulate me. I wanted to confront her right then, to throw the evidence in her face and watch her perfect composure crumble. But I held back. Tomorrow night, everything would be revealed. I just needed to maintain the charade for one more day. "I'll think about it," I said. "Thank you for your concern." Marlena smiled, apparently satisfied. "That's all I ask. I'll see you tomorrow night." After she left, I sat alone in my study for a long time, thinking about how close we were to disaster. If Marlena suspected anything, if she had any inkling that we knew about her involvement, she could warn Desmond. They could destroy evidence, coordinate their stories, maybe even flee the country before we had a chance to act. I called Edmund on the burner phone Josiah had provided. We might have a problem. I told him about Marlena's visit, about her sudden interest in pushing Desmond's involvement with the galleries. Edmund listened without interrupting. "She's getting nervous," he said when I finished. "The forensic accountant you hired, the questions you asked Desmond about irregular transactions. She knows something is happening, even if she doesn't know exactly what. Should we move up the timeline? Confront them tonight instead of tomorrow?" Edmund was silent for a moment. "No. If we rush this, we might miss something. The FBI contact I've been working with needs until tomorrow afternoon to have agents in position. We stick to the plan. And if Marlena figures it out before then? She won't. She's smart, but she's also arrogant. She thinks she's the cleverest person in every room. That arrogance will be her downfall." I hoped he was right. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the house made me jump. Every creak of the old wooden floors, every rustle of wind against the windows seemed like a threat. I kept imagining Marlena creeping through the hallways, discovering our plans, making a phone call that would send everything crashing down. But morning came without incident. I went through the motions of preparing for the memorial dinner, directing the caterers, arranging flowers, setting the table in the formal dining room where generations of my family had gathered for celebrations and sorrows alike. Celeste arrived early to help, and we worked in tense silence, both of us aware that the next few hours would change everything. At one point, she stopped arranging silverware and looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. "Mom, whatever happens tonight, I want you to know something." "What?" "I'm proud of you, for how you've handled all of this, for being strong enough to see it through." She paused. "And I'm sorry about Dad, about what he did, keeping us in the dark. But I understand why you're still standing by him." I pulled my daughter into a hug, holding her tight. "We're going to get through this. All of us. As a family. Even Theo?" I thought about my son, about the devastation he was about to experience. The woman he loved was a fraud. His marriage was a lie. Everything he believed about his life was about to be ripped away. Especially Theo. He's going to need us more than ever. At 4 o'clock, the FBI agents arrived. There were 3 of them, dressed in plain clothes, posing as catering staff. They wired the dining room with recording equipment and positioned themselves strategically around the house. Agent Morrison, the lead investigator Edmund had been working with, briefed me on the procedure. "Once your husband reveals himself and presents the evidence, we'll give Mr. Moreau and Mrs. Vance Moreau the opportunity to respond. If either of them makes any incriminating statements, we'll move in for the arrest. If not, we have enough documentation to take them into custody anyway, but a confession would strengthen the case considerably." "What about my son? He's not involved in any of this." Agent Morrison's expression softened slightly. "We know. We'll do our best to handle this sensitively. But I have to warn you, Mrs. Moreau, this is going to be difficult for everyone. There's no gentle way to expose this kind of betrayal." I nodded, steeling myself for what was to come. At 6 o'clock, the guests began to arrive. Desmond came first, with another bottle of expensive wine and more hollow words of sympathy. Then Theo and Marlena, arm in arm, my son looking pale and exhausted, my daughter-in-law looking perfectly composed. We gathered in the living room for drinks before dinner. Small talk, forced laughter, the uncomfortable rituals of grief. I watched Marlena work the room, touching Theo's arm reassuringly, refilling Desmond's glass, playing her part with flawless precision. She had no idea that in less than an hour her entire world would collapse, and neither did Desmond, who raised his glass for yet another toast to his dead brother, never suspecting that the brother in question was very much alive and waiting in the next room. We moved into the dining room at 7 o'clock. The table was set with my grandmother's china, the crystal glasses that Edmund and I had received as a wedding gift, candles casting warm light across the faces of everyone I loved and everyone who had betrayed me. It was a beautiful scene, the kind of elegant family gathering that magazines photograph for their lifestyle sections. No one looking at us would have guessed what was about to happen. I sat at the head of the table, with Desmond to my right and Theo to my left. Marlena was next to Theo, her hand resting on his arm in that possessive way she had. Celeste sat across from them, her expression carefully neutral, though I could see the tension in her shoulders. The first course was served by the catering staff, including the 3 FBI agents who moved through the room with practiced ease. I barely tasted the food. My stomach was in knots, my heart pounding so hard I was certain everyone could hear it. Desmond dominated the conversation, as he always did. He told stories about Edmund, carefully curated memories that painted him as a devoted brother. The time they went fishing as boys, and Edmund caught a fish so big their father didn't believe them. The summer they spent backpacking through Europe after Edmund finished his doctorate. The advice Edmund had given him when his first marriage fell apart. I listened to these stories and wondered how much of them were true. Had Edmund really been the supportive brother Desmond described? Or had Desmond resented him even then, nursing grievances that would eventually curdle into hatred? "Edmund always believed the best in people," Desmond said, raising his glass. "Sometimes too much so. He trusted people who didn't deserve it, Forgave people who didn't earn it. That was his gift, but it was also his weakness. The irony was so thick I nearly choked on it. Desmond talking about trust and forgiveness while sitting at the table of the brother he had tried to murder. The audacity was breathtaking. To Edmund, Desmond continued, the best brother a man could ask for. May he rest in peace. We all raised our glasses. Even Celeste, though I saw her jaw clench as she drank. The main course arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Theo talked about a case he was working on, some corporate merger that required delicate negotiations. Marlena mentioned a charity gala she was organizing, dropping names of wealthy donors with practiced ease. Desmond described his latest acquisition for a client in Geneva, a 19th-century landscape that had sold for $2 million. I wondered if that painting was real or another forgery. I wondered how many lies Desmond had told at this very table over the years, how many fraudulent deals he had celebrated with my wine and my food and my unsuspecting hospitality. As the plates were cleared and dessert was served, I felt the moment approaching. My hands were trembling slightly, and I pressed them flat against the tablecloth to steady them. Celeste caught my eye from across the table and gave me an almost imperceptible nod. Before we finish, I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, there's something I need to share with all of you. Something important about Edmund. The table fell silent. Theo looked at me with concern. Marlena's expression remained politely interested. Desmond set down his wine glass and leaned forward slightly. What is it, Vivienne? Over the past week, I've been going through Edmund's papers, his files, his correspondence. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I found some things that disturbed me, things I think the family needs to know about. I saw it then. A flicker of something in Desmond's eyes. Not quite fear, but a heightened alertness. The instinct of a predator sensing danger. What kind of things? He asked carefully. I reached under the table and pulled out a folder I had placed there earlier. Inside were copies of the evidence Edmund and I had compiled. Bank records, authentication certificates, communications between Desmond and his network of forgers. These, I said, sliding the folder across the table toward Desmond. Perhaps you can explain them. Desmond opened the folder and began to read. I watched his face carefully, looking for the moment when he realized how much we knew. It came quickly. The color drained from his cheeks. His hands, usually so steady, began to shake. Where did you get these? His voice was barely above a whisper. Does it matter? What matters is what they show. 15 years of forgeries, Desmond. 15 years of using my galleries, my name, my reputation to sell fraudulent artwork. $4.2 million stolen from collectors who trusted the Ashworth name. Theo was staring at his uncle in confusion. What is she talking about? Uncle Desmond, what is this? But Desmond was not looking at Theo. He was looking at me. And for the first time since I had known him, his charming mask had completely fallen away. What I saw beneath it was ugly, desperate, dangerous. You don't understand, he said. You don't know the whole story. Then enlighten me. Before Desmond could respond, I turned to Marlena. She had gone very still, her hand frozen on Theo's arm, her face a careful blank. And while we're sharing, perhaps Marlena would like to explain her role in all of this. The reaction was immediate. Theo jerked away from his wife as if burned. What? Mom, what are you saying? I'm saying that your wife has been working with Desmond for at least 2 years. I'm saying she married you to gain access to my business. I'm saying she's been receiving payments, 20% of the profits from every fraudulent sale, deposited into an account in the Cayman Islands. Marlena's composure finally cracked. That's ridiculous. Theo, she's lying. She's confused, grief-stricken. You can't believe this. But I was not finished. We have bank records, Marlena. We have emails between you and Patricia Holloway at the Atlanta Gallery. We have Patricia's testimony about how you recruited her, threatened her, used her to bypass our authentication processes. Patricia is lying. Whatever she told you, it's not true. She's trying to cover her own crimes by blaming me. And the money in the Cayman Islands? Is that a lie too? Marlena opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For once in her life, she had no smooth answer, no clever deflection. The evidence was too overwhelming. Theo stood up from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Is it true? His voice was shaking. Marlena, look at me. Is what my mother is saying true? His wife would not meet his eyes. "Oh my God!" Theo put his hands over his face, and I could see his shoulders trembling. "Oh my God." Celeste moved to her brother's side, putting a hand on his arm. "Theo, I'm so sorry." But the evening's revelations were not complete. I looked at Desmond, who had been sitting in stunned silence, and I delivered the final blow. "There's one more thing you should know, Desmond. One more piece of information that I think will interest you." "What could possibly be left?" His voice was hollow, defeated. I did not answer. Instead, I simply looked toward the door of the dining room, the door that led to the butler's pantry, where Edmund had been waiting for the past hour, listening to everything. The door opened, and my husband stepped into the room. The sound that came from Desmond's throat was not quite human. It was a strangled cry of pure terror, the sound of a man confronting his worst nightmare. He pushed back from the table so violently that his chair toppled over, and he scrambled to his feet, backing away until he hit the wall. "No, no, 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 you're dead. I watched them put you in the ground. I saw the casket. You're dead." Edmund walked slowly toward the table, his eyes never leaving his brother's face. He looked calm, almost peaceful, but I could see the pain beneath the surface. This was the brother he had loved, had protected, had sacrificed for his entire life. And this was the brother who had tried to murder him. "The poison you used was sophisticated," Edmund said quietly. "Designed to mimic cardiac arrest. Very hard to detect. But you made one mistake, Desmond. The paramedics who responded to my collapse had just completed training on exotic toxins. They recognized the symptoms and administered the correct treatment." Theo was staring at his father with an expression of complete shock. "Dad? But how? I don't understand." "I'm sorry, son. I'm sorry for letting you believe I was dead. I'm sorry for all of this." Edmund's voice broke slightly, but he continued. "I found out about Desmond's forgery operation 6 months ago. When I confronted him about it, he decided that killing me was easier than stopping." "That's a lie!" Desmond's voice was high and desperate. "I never tried to kill anyone. Edmund, tell them the truth. You collapsed from a heart attack. Your health has always been fragile. This is insane." "Then how do you explain the toxicology report?" Edmund pulled a piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "The hospital kept a blood sample. The poison is still detectable, even after all this time. A specific compound that doesn't occur naturally in the human body. A compound that had to be administered deliberately." Desmond's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, an ally, anything. His gaze landed on Marlena. "Tell them. Tell them this is all a misunderstanding. We had nothing to do with Edmund's death. He faked it himself, obviously. This is a setup." But Marlena was not even looking at him. She was looking at the FBI agents who had stepped forward from their positions around the room, no longer pretending to be catering staff. "Desmond Moreau," Agent Morrison said, "you are under arrest for fraud, money laundering, and the attempted murder of Edmund Moreau. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Desmond's composure shattered completely. "No, you can't do this. Edmund, you can't let them do this. I'm your brother. We're family." Edmund's expression was infinitely sad. "You stopped being my brother the moment you decided to poison me. You stopped being family the moment you chose money over blood." The agents moved toward Desmond, handcuffs ready. But instead of submitting, Desmond lunged toward the table, grabbing a knife from one of the place settings. The room erupted into chaos. "Stay back," Desmond shouted, waving the knife wildly. "Stay back or I'll use this." Agent Morrison and the other FBI agents drew their weapons, but Desmond had already grabbed Celeste, pulling her in front of him like a shield. My daughter gasped as the knife pressed against her throat. "Nobody moves," Desmond hissed. "Nobody does anything, or she dies." My blood turned to ice. Celeste's eyes were wide with fear, but she held herself very still, barely breathing. "Desmond, don't do this." Edmund's voice was calm, but I could see his hands shaking. "She's innocent. She has nothing to do with any of this. She's leverage. That's all that matters." Desmond was backing toward the door, dragging Celeste with him. "I'm going to walk out of here, get in my car, and drive away. If anyone tries to stop me, if anyone follows me, I'll kill her. Do you understand?" Theo took a step forward. "Uncle Desmond, please let her go. This isn't going to help anything." "Shut up," This is your mother's fault, all of it. If she had just accepted my help, if she had just let me manage the galleries, none of this would have happened. But she had to dig. She had to investigate. She couldn't leave well enough alone. He was at the doorway now, still holding Celeste in front of him. The FBI agents had their weapons trained on him, but there was no clear shot. One wrong move, and my daughter would die. I stepped forward, my hands raised. Desmond, look at me. His wild eyes focused on my face. You want the galleries? Take them? You want money? I'll give you everything I have. Just let Celeste go. It's too late for that. It's too late for any of that. His voice cracked with hysteria. You've ruined everything. You and Edmund and your perfect family. Do you know what it's like? Do you have any idea what it's like to always be second best? To watch your brother get everything while you get nothing? I'm sorry. The words surprised me even as I said them. I'm sorry that you felt that way. I'm sorry that Edmund and I didn't see how much you were hurting. But this isn't the answer, Desmond. Hurting Celeste won't fix anything. For a moment, just a moment, I saw something human in Desmond's eyes. Something broken and sad and desperate. He had spent his whole life chasing something he could never catch, trying to fill a void that could never be filled. And now, at the end of everything, he was finally confronting the emptiness at the center of his existence. The moment passed. Desmond tightened his grip on Celeste and took another step toward the door. And then Marlena moved. I do not know what she was thinking. Perhaps she saw an opportunity to escape in the chaos. Perhaps she was trying to help Desmond, her partner in crime. Or perhaps, in some twisted way, she was trying to redeem herself. Whatever her motivation, she lunged toward Desmond, grabbing for the arm that held the knife. Desmond spun, startled, and in that instant of distraction, Celeste twisted free of his grip. The FBI agents swarmed forward. There was shouting, a clatter as the knife fell to the floor, the sound of bodies hitting the ground. By the time the chaos subsided, Desmond was face down on the carpet, hands cuffed behind his back, and Marlena was being restrained by 2 agents. Celeste ran to me, and I held her so tightly I thought my arms might break. She was shaking, crying, but she was alive. She was safe. Edmund came to us, wrapping his arms around both of us, and for a long moment we just stood there, the 3 of us, holding each other in the aftermath of the storm. Theo stood alone by the table, watching his wife being led away in handcuffs. His face was utterly blank, the face of a man who has lost everything and does not yet know how to feel about it. Marlena did not look back at him. Not once. As the FBI agents led Desmond and Marlena out of the house, Agent Morrison approached me. Mrs. Moreau, we'll need statements from everyone, but that can wait until tomorrow. Tonight, you should be with your family. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. The door closed behind the agents, and suddenly the house was quiet. Just the 5 of us, Edmund and me and our children, standing in the wreckage of what should have been a memorial dinner. Theo finally moved, walking slowly toward his father. For a long moment, the 2 men just looked at each other. You're really alive, Theo said. His voice sounded like a child's. I'm really alive. And Marlena, everything Mom said about her, it's all true. I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry. Theo's face crumpled, and Edmund caught him as he fell, holding his son the way he had when Theo was a boy and the world had seemed so much simpler. I watched them, these men I loved, and I felt something shift inside me. The anger I had been carrying toward Edmund, the fury at his deception, was still there, but it was tempered now by something else, an understanding of how far he had been willing to go to protect us, a recognition that love, even misguided love, was still love. We had survived. Against all odds, against all the forces that had tried to tear us apart, we had survived. Now came the harder part. Learning how to live with what we had learned. Learning how to trust again. Learning how to be a family when the very foundation of that family had been shaken to its core. But that was tomorrow's work. Tonight, we were together. Tonight, we were alive. And for now, that was enough. 3 months have passed since that night. 3 months of depositions and court appearances, of lawyers and FBI interviews, of newspaper headlines and whispered gossip at charity events. 3 months of trying to rebuild a life that had been shattered into 1,000 pieces. Desmond's trial begins next month. The evidence against him is overwhelming. Bank records, authentication documents, Patricia's testimony, and most damning of all, the toxicology report that proves he poisoned his own brother. His lawyers have tried everything to get the charges reduced, but the prosecution is confident. Desmond will spend the rest of his life in prison. Marlena took a different path. 2 weeks after her arrest, she contacted the FBI and offered to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. She gave them everything. Names of forgers Desmond had worked with across Europe, details of transactions we had not even known about, evidence of other collectors who had been defrauded over the years. Her testimony will be crucial in bringing down the entire network. In exchange, she will serve 5 to 7 years instead of the 20 she would have faced otherwise. I am told she has already been transferred to a minimum security facility in Virginia, where she spends her days in a cell that is nothing like the elegant homes she schemed so hard to inhabit. I do not think about her often. When I do, I feel nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. She is simply a closed chapter in a book I am still writing. Theo is the one who suffers most from her choices. My son filed for divorce the day after the arrests, but legal proceedings cannot erase emotional wounds. He has moved back into the house with me temporarily, sleeping in his childhood bedroom, trying to make sense of a marriage that was never what he thought it was. Some nights I hear him pacing in the hallway at 3 in the morning. Some days I find him sitting in the garden, staring at nothing, his coffee going cold in his hands. The woman he loved, the woman he built his future around, never existed. Marlena was a character, a performance, a means to an end. And Theo is left holding the empty space where his life used to be. But he is healing. Slowly, painfully, but healing nonetheless. He has started seeing a therapist twice a week. He has reconnected with old friends he had neglected during his marriage. Last week, he laughed at something Celeste said at dinner. A real laugh, the first I had heard from him in months. It was a small thing, but it gave me hope. Celeste has emerged from this ordeal stronger than ever. She has officially taken over as artistic director of the galleries, a role she was born for. Her eye for talent is even sharper than mine was at her age, and the artists she has brought in over the past 3 months have already generated significant interest from collectors. More importantly, she has become the emotional anchor of our family. When Theo spirals into despair, Celeste is there to pull him back. When Edmund and I struggle to communicate, Celeste mediates. When the weight of everything threatens to crush me, my daughter appears with a cup of tea and a willingness to simply sit in silence until the darkness passes. I am so proud of her, so proud of the woman she has become. As for Edmund and me, that is more complicated. We are still married. We still live in the same house. But for the first 2 months after his resurrection, we slept in separate bedrooms. The trust between us had been broken so fundamentally that I could not bear to be close to him, even in sleep. He understood. He never pushed, never demanded, never tried to justify what he had done. He simply waited, giving me the space I needed to process a betrayal that came wrapped in love. We started couples therapy 6 weeks ago. It was Edmund's suggestion, and I agreed because I did not know what else to do. I loved him still, despite everything. But love is not always enough. Love without trust is just pain with a pleasant name. Our therapist is a woman in her 60s named Dr. Caroline Webb. She has kind eyes and a direct manner that I appreciate. In our sessions, she helps us excavate the patterns that led to Edmund's decision, the assumptions and fears and unexamined beliefs that made him think deception was protection. Edmund grew up with a father who controlled everything, who made all the decisions for the family and expected gratitude rather than input. Edmund swore he would never be that man, but in trying to protect me from Desmond's crimes, he became exactly what he feared. He took away my agency, my choice, my right to face danger alongside the man I married. Understanding this does not erase the hurt, but it helps me see Edmund as he truly is. A flawed man who loves me imperfectly, just as I am a flawed woman who loves him the same way. Last week, I moved back into our bedroom. Not because everything is resolved, but because I am ready to try, ready to rebuild what was broken, ready to see if 32 years of marriage can survive the worst test imaginable. The first night, we lay in the dark, not touching, not speaking. The silence between us was heavy with everything we had been through. Then Edmund reached across the space between us and took my hand. Just that. Nothing more. I held on, and I did not let go. The galleries have survived. It was touch and go for a while. When news of the forgery scandal broke, collectors panicked. Several threatened lawsuits. The art world press had a field day with headlines about fraud and family betrayal. But I have spent 40 years building relationships in this industry. I have a reputation for integrity that one scandal cannot erase. I personally contacted every collector who had purchased through my galleries in the past 15 years. I offered independent authentication at my expense. I pledged to make whole anyone who had unknowingly purchased a forgery. In the end, only 3 works were confirmed as fraudulent, all sold to collectors who were more interested in financial settlements than public scandal. I paid them back every cent, plus damages, plus a generous bonus for their discretion. The total cost was just over $6 million, a significant sum, but one I could afford, and worth every penny to preserve the legacy my grandmother started, and I spent my life building. Now, standing in the original gallery on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I think about how far I have come. The same tall windows still let in the afternoon light. The same smell of oil paint and old wood still fills the air. But I am not the 23-year-old girl who inherited this space anymore. I am a woman who has weathered betrayal, survived attempted murder by proxy, and emerged on the other side with her family and her business intact. There is a new exhibition opening next month. Emerging artists that Celeste discovered. Young talents whose work speaks to themes of resilience and transformation. It seems fitting. The front door opens, and I turn to see Edmund entering with 2 cups of coffee from the cafe down the street. He has started doing this lately, showing up at the gallery in the afternoons with small offerings. Coffee, pastries, flowers from the farmer's market, gestures that say, what words cannot. He hands me my cup and stands beside me, looking at the paintings on the walls. Celeste has good instincts, he says. She does, better than mine at her age. We stand in comfortable silence, sipping our coffee. Outside, tourists walk past the windows, pointing at the historic architecture of Savannah's streets. Inside, the gallery is quiet, waiting for the next chapter of its story. I have been thinking, Edmund says eventually, about what I want to do. Now that I am officially alive again. And what is that? I want to write. About art, about history, about the intersection of beauty and crime. He pauses. I want to tell the story of what happened to us, not for publication necessarily, but for Theo and Celeste, for our grandchildren someday, so they understand what their family went through and how we survived it. I consider this, the idea of our nightmare being preserved in words, passed down to future generations. I think that is a good idea, I say finally. But I have one condition. What? I get to read every chapter before you finalize it. No more secrets. No more decisions made for my own good without my input. Edmund smiles, the first real smile I have seen from him in months. Deal. He takes my hand again, right there in my grandmother's gallery, surrounded by beautiful things that other people created. And I let him. Because that is what marriage is in the end. Not perfection. Not the absence of betrayal or pain. But the choice to keep holding on, even when letting go would be easier. The road ahead is uncertain. There will be more trials, more headlines, more difficult conversations. Edmund and I will have to rebuild our trust brick by brick, and some days the task will seem impossible. But we are still here, still standing, still holding hands in a gallery that has weathered 100 years of storms. And that, I have learned, is no small thing.